Hello and welcome. You're watching the Kaleido Insights weekly video installment where we explore the impacts of emerging technologies on key themes that affect our lives as consumers, the future of businesses, and the ecosystems we're all part of. I'm Jamie Szymanski, an industry analyst and founding partner at Kaleido Insights, and I'm joined today by my amazing, fantastic, stellar business partners, Jessica Grootman and Jeremiah Aoying.
Hey,
Hi, guys.
everybody.
We are delighted to have you all here watching today, and we hope you're staying healthy and well. The theme we'll be discussing today is political influence and digital platforms. And I think it's only appropriate to kick off the conversation, examining the elephant in the room, Facebook. Facebook has seen more than 400 advertisers at this point, many of them large brands, leave the platform due to its inaction around stopping hate speech from spreading throughout its user content. Jess, I know that you have a lot of thoughts on this. Let's kick it off. What's your take in terms of what's next for Facebook?
Yeah, the Stop Hate for Profit campaign marks an important, maybe turning point, but certainly chapter in the ongoing discussion of the role of digital platforms and especially social media platforms when it comes to political influence. That number started with 6 organizations, has jumped to over 400 large corporations, but 1,000 businesses at this point. So we're seeing a lot of traction there. Will change come from this? What we're seeing is that advertisers are calling on Facebook to send the message that profits are not worth promoting hate. And so, in many ways, I think this announcement actually is part of several other existing cultural political trends around, how do we think about the role of antitrust? How large should these corporations actually be? What is the role in terms of privacy and data sharing and the business models, the advertising-based business models in terms of how they prioritize people's attention for revenues? The role of corporate influence and campaign finance reform. So a lot kind of emerging and bubbling below the surface that is rolling into this sort of enough is enough, right? I guess you could say trend that we're seeing in several parts of society, but is now the spotlight is cast on Facebook.
I have a slightly different angle on this. I believe that some of these brands were going to pull back their marketing spend anyways, because we're in some quasi-recession. The market has pulled back, and what a great way for a brand to make that sound like their company's doing good, but yet purpose over profits. We really care about the culture, but they might have been dialing back the revenues anyway. So I really question, was it just fortuitous timing for them?
That's true in terms of advertising investment amid COVID-19. Absolutely. I wonder, now that so many brands have pulled out of advertising and made such a public statement about it, and oftentimes had some pretty good PR based off of it, what will it take for them to come back to Facebook? Because it's not just like in the past, if they just withdrew their budgets, they could come back as they pleased, or maybe didn't make a public statement about it. But now that this Stop Hate for Profit campaign is going, there's going to have to be real change from Facebook, not just holding a press conference with Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg to say that, hey, we're making progress on change. We really don't have any plans yet. And they failed for all intents and purposes. Their civil rights audit that was recently done as well, that showed the huge spread of racism and bigotry on the platform, among other hate speech. So there's going to have to be, for the first time, I think, in history, a major change made by the platform in order to get these advertisers back to keep the content engine running.
Yeah.
And such, oh, go please, Jessica.
Well, I was just going to say that, this gets back to this question of kind of who owns the rails. And in some ways, what options do advertisers really have to go to? Yes, there are Google and there are other advertising sites, but Facebook, is truly the lion's share in terms of advertising revenue today. To this point, we are closely watching the emergence of other social media platforms, more politically slanted social media platforms. Will there be either a breakup or more of a kind of specification proliferation of other platforms as part of the shifting of ad revenue dollars?
Thank you. In addition to that, Jessica, yes, and Jamie, they did do that press announcement, and Mark did that emergency town hall in the video.
Yeah.
And recently they claimed they cleaned up around 100 hate sites or some small amount like that as part of that. But a lot of this still is a tempest in a teapot. When you add up some of the top 100 brands here, it accounts for only 6% of the company's annual ad revenue.
It's like nothing.
It's a very small amount.
Yeah.
A lot of this is PR on both sides, Facebook management as well as on the brand side. But in many cases, the brand said they're going to take a 1-month hiatus and then review the situation. Unilever said that they will push pause indefinitely and evaluate where their content and ads and it shows up next to all media across all platforms. And so that is kind of the bigger story here. Yes.
That's huge. Thinking about, retargeting and native advertising and all these engines that are behind the scenes that are serving up ads on like hundreds of thousands of sites based on the content in order to police that. This makes me think in terms of the future of ethics policies at organizations will also have to include advertising, and where you advertise, it doesn't align with your corporate values and mission and vision. And it sort of gets into this, culture war that we're seeing corporations become a part of a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, we talked a little bit about this in our recent video on inclusive technology, where what are we measuring? What is the business model supporting? That is part of the question of inclusivity and indeed of ethics. In this case, Facebook's own civil rights audit found that 64% of registrations to Facebook groups focused on extremist topics. Right.
Wow.
Including anti-Semitism and bigotry and so on and so forth. And so, this question of sort of at the algorithmic level, what are we optimizing for, and how does that translate ethically? All of these pieces are tied.
Oh, and I think beyond Facebook too, I'm sure that you guys from time to time, and many of our viewers out there too, have, perused Reddit here and there. And, Reddit recently, famously, finally shut down the community, the Donald, which was the largest community online on the site devoted to Donald Trump supporters and followers, because the group repeatedly violated its policies of targeted hate speech in many capacities, many rules that they have at their code of conduct on Reddit. And the moderators had no plans to stop that. That was among 2,000 other communities that Reddit did shut down for violating its policies around hate speech. So I think it kind of brings up the question. I think there's two groups of content that are really being policed here. One would be that example there with Reddit, which is very targeted, very active supporters. They go on to visit that one group, versus a Facebook, a Twitter, some of these other more broad-reaching social platforms. It's more passive content consumption. So that's when I think the role of the platforms even more important, because they are the ones that are, tweaking the algorithm to serve up certain types of content in the newsfeed. So they have even more onus, I think, in order to make sure that hate speech is not being spread at the organic level.
Yeah, it's there's something too here in terms of whose role is it, as in society we're discussing roles and responsibilities. Whose role is it to regulate? There's obviously, we're talking about self-regulation. What are the platforms themselves doing about this? But remember, our congressional leaders are all using these platforms for political advertising.
That's true. Yeah,
and all benefit from the reach and the branding and the getting the message out. This is truly the most viral and wide-reaching way to do so as a political candidate, just as a brand. So there's something, maybe it's a little cynical to call it the fox guarding the hen house, but there's something about, our regulators being responsible for regulating such platforms, while also relying on them primarily for their own needs in terms of advertising.
Right. I wonder if this is a good time too to talk about Section 230. I feel like that really relates.
Act.
Yes, the Decency Act that was created. I think it was back in the 90s, I want to say. AOL, there was some hate speech on there. You might know more about this than I do, Jess. But where basically it protects platforms from liability in terms of what the users post. But it brings up in and of itself the question are platforms these days actually platforms anymore, or are they news outlets? And there is quite a distinction, because legally a platform versus a distributor has different protections and liabilities. So, the New York Times, if they publish hate speech in any capacity or allow an op-ed to do such, they are held liable in a different way than a social platform would be, because its users are exercising free speech on there. What are your guys' take on that?
Well, it also depends on the situation. If people are being hurt, or there is a call for violence, and which has happened on any said platforms, and that can cause that. Even at the New York Times, if you are doing a op-ed around a particular politically charged, well, somebody lost their job 2 days ago, one of the editors and contributors. So I think these guidelines don't mean much in today's age, where society is holding these platforms or publishing houses accountable like they are full editorial responsible.
Yeah, I see this as one of the many examples of policy really lagging behind the technology. We've always had free speech, we've always had hate speech, we've always had the ability to fabricate, truths or lies altogether.
Right.
But now they can flourish at a really viral and even programmatic pace. And this is fundamentally different than sort of the ability for anyone to spew whatever they want in the past. The technology industry is, rife with various ways where we are trying to kind of shapeshift old laws or old precedents from other industries into the technology space, but it's, a round peg in a square hole, so to speak.
There has been kind of a medium play where Twitter recently categorized one of the president's Trump's as manipulated media, not pulling it down, not really amplifying, but notifying, hey, this doesn't fit within what we think could be our editorial guidelines, and you should look at this. And there's been variations on that. So they're flagging and notifying, which has created uproar amongst multiple sides of the community.
I mean, I think it's a good first step, but it's just that. It's the first step. I think, to both your points, the ability to easily and quickly create and share content on these platforms, it's impossible at the current state in order to police everything, right? And so that's where I think we'll see the rise of AI being used in order to analyze a meme quickly. Let's see, if you might see on Facebook or Twitter that is incredibly hateful, but it's an image. The text can't be analyzed as quickly by normal automated standards for content policing. So I think we're going to see the rise of that a lot more. I do think it's a good first step, though, at least to make a stand and police some of that content so openly and mark it as manipulated media, because this gets into a completely other conversation, I think, around the infodemic that we're seeing really unravel here, and deciphering fake news from real news, whether it's at the smallest level of fabricating a fact in an article, all the way up to creating a deep fake video where you are manipulating video to make a politician say something that they're not. And I am personally very worried to see how this is going to continue to grow in the coming months as we reach November.
Yeah, and you raise a good point about deepfakes, often looked at as sort of the next generation of manipulated media or fake news or whatever. And I think it's important that we, speaking of the pace of technological change, that we remember that we are likely in the early days of what this looks like, how misinformation, disinformation, omitted information influences our decision making, and even bleeds into the physical world. We've seen some examples of that, with conspiracy theories bubbling over, for example. But certainly there are concerns from the national security perspective of with disinformation or misinformation, this bleeds into how we manage systems or how bots automate certain decisions. We also are seeing, and we'll talk about this in a future podcast, kind of the emergence of very politically motivated online armies. Who may
looking forward to that discussion too, yeah.
But who may or may not play very important roles in the virality and how information spreads by design, fake, dis, or otherwise. So I think we're in the early days, and particularly in the integration with the physical world.
Agreed. This has been a riveting conversation. A lot of energy today around this. I mean, you can tell it's all a very important topic for all of us to discuss. And we will have part 2 next week, where, as Jess alluded to, we'll be talking more about these online subcultures that do have political influence and a couple of other things around the infodemic that we are seeing. Again, great discussion today. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Jeremiah, for your insightful contributions as always. You can learn more about Kaleido Insights coverage and our research themes on our website at kaleidoinsights.com. And please join us next week as we continue to analyze the impacts of emerging technologies. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Well.